Good evening. My name is J.P. Harlick. I'm a lieutenant with the Houston Police Department. Standing right next to me is Lieutenant Barrow, who's the shift commander out here in the Central Patrol area. This evening at approximately 9:50, units were dispatched out here to 404 Oxford regarding a shooting. When Central Patrol units arrived at the scene, they found that there had been a domestic disturbance between a male and a female.
It was a quiet summer night in Houston, Texas. Inside a small apartment, 3 little girls lay curled up beside their mother, their eyes fixed on the glow of the television. Laughter and warmth filled the room. A moment of peace, a moment of safety. But in an instant, that safety was shattered. The door wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. This wasn't the kind of place where strangers wandered in. But the man who entered wasn't a stranger. He knew exactly where to go, exactly who he was looking for. 9-year-old Khylie Sorrells had no reason to fear the man standing in the doorway. She had seen him before. He had once been a part of their lives. But that night, he wasn't there for a visit. He wasn't there to talk. 2 gunshots rang out. A mother's scream followed. The life of an innocent child was gone. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was something else, something that should have never been allowed to happen. The man who pulled the trigger wasn't a first-time offender. He wasn't a desperate criminal with nowhere left to run. He was a man the system had seen before, a man who had been given chance after chance to walk free, despite the warning signs. How does someone with a violent past, with multiple charges hanging over his head, end up standing in a child's bedroom with a gun? How does a mother, who had already been threatened once before, find herself face to face with a man who was supposed to be behind bars? This is the story of Khylie Sorrells, a child who had dreams, who had a future, a child who trusted that the world around her was safe, and the man who stole that future, because no one stopped him when they had the chance. What went wrong, and how many more lives will be lost before something changes? Khylie Sorrells was more than just a name in the headlines. She was a bright, energetic 9-year-old girl who filled every room she entered with laughter and joy. She had a competitive spirit, especially when it came to basketball. On the court, she was a force to be reckoned with, earning the title of MVP among her peers. But beyond her athleticism, Khylie was a big sister first. She adored her 2 younger siblings, always looking out for them, always making sure they were safe. In the quiet moments, she loved making TikTok videos, capturing glimpses of her world, sharing pieces of her happiness with friends. She was ready to start 5th grade, excited for a new school year, unaware that she would never get the chance. Her mother, Brittany Sorrells, described her as the heart of their home, a child who brought warmth and light into their lives. But now that light was gone. Brittany's voice trembled as she spoke of her daughter, the pain in her words unmistakable. No mother should ever have to bury a child, let alone one whose life was taken so violently. There were no words to make sense of it, no explanation that could ever justify why someone would take Khylie away from her family. The community that had once cheered for Khylie on the basketball court now mourned her loss. Teachers at Windsor Village Elementary School struggled to find the right words to comfort her classmates. Some of them were too young to fully understand what had happened, too innocent to grasp the permanence of death. The Houston Police Department's Police Activities League, where Khylie had been an active participant, felt the weight of her absence. She had been a part of something bigger, a child with promise, a child with a future. Now, that future had been erased. Outside the Sorrells apartment, candles flickered in the night as friends, family, and neighbors gathered, their faces etched with sorrow. They held onto the memories, the laughter, the dreams that would never be realized. They spoke of a girl who should still be here, a girl who had done nothing to deserve what happened. The injustice of it all hung heavy in the air. A young life stolen, a family shattered. And the community left asking the same question. Why? Jeremiah Jones was not an unknown figure to law enforcement. His name had appeared in police reports long before the night he forced his way into Brittany Sorrells' apartment. He had been arrested multiple times, charged with crimes that painted a clear picture of a man prone to violence, a man who had no regard for the law or the safety of those around him. His record was long, filled with cases that should have raised alarms, evading arrest, making terroristic threats against a family member, burglary of a habitation. He had already proven himself to be a danger, yet time and time again, he was allowed to walk free. At the time of Khylie's murder, Jones was out on not one, not two, but 5 different bonds in Harris County. 5 separate chances given to a man with a violent past. One of those charges included possession of a firearm as a felon, an offense that should have ensured he remained behind bars. And yet, just 2 weeks before he would take the life of a 9-year-old girl, the system failed once again. Despite his repeated arrests, despite the warnings written in the records, Jones was released. It was a pattern that had played out before, violent offenders being given leniency, being granted another opportunity despite proving time and time again that they were a danger to society. The very purpose of a bond system is to ensure that individuals awaiting trial do not pose a continued threat. Yet in this case, in so many cases, that system failed. For Khylie Sorrells, the warnings had been there. She had seen firsthand what Jones was capable of. A week before the shooting, he had come to her apartment armed with a gun, threatening to kill her. She had survived that night. She had seen the fear in her children's eyes. But nothing was done. Nothing changed. And when he returned on June 13th, there was no one left to stop him. The question that lingers is one that should have been asked long before tragedy struck. Why was Jeremiah Jones free? How was he allowed to continue walking the streets with a record like his? How many warnings does it take before the system finally steps in? In the wake of Khylie's death, the outrage was immediate. Community members, activists, and legal experts turned their attention to the Harris County judicial system, demanding answers. Victims advocate Andy Kahan from Crime Stoppers spoke out, stating what so many were thinking, that Jones had been given chance after chance, that he had violated bond conditions before, that this should never have been allowed to happen. But for Khylie's family, those words brought no comfort. No amount of outrage could bring her back. No explanation could undo what had been done. The only thing left was the grim reality that a child was dead, a mother was wounded, and a man who should have been behind bars had been given yet another opportunity, one that cost an innocent girl her life. June 13th, 2022, was supposed to be an ordinary night for the Sorrells family. In their small Houston apartment, Khylie Sorrells lay in bed with her 3 daughters, 9-year-old Khylie, 7-year-old Elena, and their 1-year-old baby sister. The room was filled with warmth, the soft glow of the television illuminating their faces as they watched a movie together. It was a simple moment, the kind of moment that makes a home feel safe. Khylie had been doing her best to move forward. Life as a single mother wasn't easy, but she was strong. She had ended things with Jeremiah Jones 2 months earlier, knowing it was the best decision for her and her daughters. He had never been a man she could trust. Their relationship had been filled with tension, and after 8 months, she finally walked away. But Jones didn't seem to accept that it was over. He had shown up at her apartment just a week earlier with a gun, threatening her life. She had feared for her safety then, but she never could have imagined the nightmare that was still to come. At around 10 p.m., the peaceful atmosphere in the apartment was shattered. The front door swung open. Jones had entered uninvited. Khylie didn't know how long he had been outside, whether he had been watching, waiting for the right moment. But now he was standing there, his presence heavy with anger. His eyes were locked on Khylie. He wasn't just there to talk. He wanted something. He moved through the apartment with purpose, making his way toward the television mounted on the wall. Without hesitation, he ripped it down, claiming it belonged to him. Khylie didn't argue. She knew better than to provoke him when he was like this. But taking the television wasn't enough. His anger ran deeper. Jones turned his attention back to Khylie, his voice filled with accusation. He was convinced she had moved on, that there was another man. His words dripped with jealousy, his temper rising with every sentence. He demanded her phone. Khylie, knowing she had no choice, handed it over. Then, without warning, Jones walked away, moving toward the bedroom where Khylie and her sisters were still lying in bed. Khylie could feel the tension in the air, something inside her screaming that this was about to get worse. A moment later, the first gunshot rang out. The sound was deafening, cutting through the stillness of the apartment like a blade. Then another shot. Brittany's body tensed with terror. She barely had time to react before Jones emerged from the bedroom. His rage now turned toward her. Before she could move, before she could run, the bullet tore through her shoulder. Pain shot through her body as she collapsed, her mind racing with one desperate thought: her children. With Brittany wounded, Jones fled, leaving behind the destruction he had caused. The apartment was eerily silent now, except for the sound of Brittany's ragged breathing as she forced herself up, ignoring the pain. She stumbled toward the bedroom, her heart pounding, and then she saw her. Khylie was on the floor, a gunshot wound to her head. Her small body was still, too still. The child who had spent her days running across the basketball court, laughing with her friends, and dreaming of 5th grade was now fighting for her life. The screams that followed weren't just Brittany's. They were the screams of a mother whose world had just been torn apart. Moments later, emergency responders arrived. Paramedics rushed Khylie to Memorial Hermann Hospital, their efforts desperate, their voices urgent. But despite everything they did, despite every last attempt to save her, the words that came next were final. Khylie was gone. The reality of it hit like a wave, crashing down with unbearable force. A mother, wounded and heartbroken. 2 little sisters, left without their big sister. A life stolen. All because a man who should never have been free had been allowed to walk through their door. The search for Jeremiah Jones began the moment he fled the crime scene. Law enforcement knew they were dealing with a dangerous man. A man who had just murdered a child in cold blood and critically injured her mother. He had a history of violence, a record filled with offenses that should have kept him behind bars. Now he was on the run, and every passing moment increased the urgency to capture him before he could harm anyone else. June 14th, 2022. Less than 24 hours after the horrifying attack, authorities tracked him down. It wasn't a quiet arrest. This wasn't a man who would simply turn himself in. The Houston Police Department deployed their SWAT and tactical team officers, a clear indication of the threat he posed. The location? A parking lot on Imperial Valley Drive, about 20 miles from the crime scene. The air was thick with tension as officers surrounded the area. Jones had nowhere to run, no doors to kick down, no women to intimidate, no children to terrorize. His reign of destruction had come to an end. The arrest was swift and efficient. Officers moved in, secured him, and within moments, Jeremiah Jones was in custody. But even as he was taken into the back of a patrol car, the questions remained. This wasn't just about one violent night. This wasn't just about one family suffering. This was about the system that had allowed it to happen. Jones was formally charged with capital murder for the death of 9-year-old Khylie Sorrells, a charge that carried the weight of the most severe punishment Texas law could impose. He was also charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for shooting Brittany Sorrells. But was that enough? The community didn't just want to see Jones behind bars. They wanted answers. How was a man with his record allowed to walk the streets freely? Why had he been granted multiple bonds despite violating previous conditions? How many red flags had been ignored before he finally took an innocent life? Victims, advocates, legal experts, and members of the public demanded accountability. They pointed to the judicial system in Harris County, questioning how a repeat offender with a history of violence was able to slip through the cracks time and time again. The issue wasn't just Jeremiah Jones. It was a system that allowed him to be in that apartment on June 13th. For Brittany Sorrells, the arrest brought no relief. It wouldn't bring back her daughter. It wouldn't erase the image of Khylie lying on the floor of their home, her life stolen in an instant. Justice, if it came, would be slow, and no matter what happened next, it would never be enough. Jeremiah Jones was finally off streets. But for the Sorrells family, for the community that mourned Khylie's loss, the damage had already been done. The trial ahead would bring new revelations, new battles, and new wounds that no sentence could ever heal. The arrest of Jeremiah Jones did not mark the end of the story. In many ways, it was just the beginning. The days that followed were filled with grief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. A child was gone, a mother was wounded, Yet the tragedy was not just about what had happened that night. It was about everything that had led up to it. The community wanted justice, but they also wanted answers. How had Jones, a man with a violent history and a clear disregard for the law, been allowed to walk free? Why had he been granted multiple bonds, despite repeatedly violating the terms of his release? The judicial system was now under scrutiny, and the public was not willing to let this case be swept aside as just another statistic. Victims advocate Andy Kahan stepped forward, voicing the frustration that so many others felt. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Jones had been in and out of the system, each time walking away with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. He should never have been out on the streets. He should never have had the opportunity to take an innocent life. The justice system, Kahan argued, had failed Khylie. It had failed her family. And if something didn't change, it would fail countless others. The outrage spread beyond Houston. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the deep flaws in the bond system that allowed repeat offenders to return to society with little consequence. There were calls for reform, demands for stricter enforcement of bond conditions, and heated debates about whether judges were too lenient in cases involving violent criminals. The people of Houston took to social media, their anger evident in every post, every comment, every shared story of a similar case that ended in tragedy. They weren't just mourning Khylie. They were fighting for her. They were demanding that her death not be in vain. But amid the outrage, there was also compassion. The loss of a child is unimaginable, and the community rallied around Khylie Sorrells, who was now left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. A GoFundMe campaign was launched to help with funeral expenses, a small gesture in the face of overwhelming grief. Donations poured in, messages of support flooded the page, and strangers came together in an effort to ease the financial burden of an unthinkable loss. The Houston Police Department's Police Activities League, where Khylie had been an active participant, paid tribute to her, remembering her as a bright young girl who had her whole life ahead of her. At Windsor Village Elementary, classmates and teachers struggled to process the fact that she would never walk through their doors again. A desk left empty, a life cut short. Yet even as the community grieved, the fight for justice was far from over. The legal battle ahead would be long and arduous, and the question remained, would the system that had failed Khylie in life finally hold her killer accountable in death? As Jeremiah Jones sat in a jail cell, the legal process moved forward. Court hearings began, each one drawing the attention of a community still mourning the loss of 9-year-old Khylie Sorrells. The charges against him were clear: capital murder for taking Kylie's life, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for shooting Khylie. The weight of these accusations left no room for leniency. If convicted, he faced the possibility of life in prison or even the death penalty. In the courtroom, prosecutors laid out the chilling details of the crime. They presented evidence, witness testimonies, and Jones' extensive criminal record, a record that painted a picture of a man who had been given chance after chance, only to escalate his violent behavior. The question on everyone's mind was not just whether he would be convicted, but how he had been allowed to reach this point in the first place. Jones' defense team faced an uphill battle. The facts of the case were damning. Khylie had survived to tell her story. The police had arrested him less than a day after the murder. There was no ambiguity, no reasonable doubt that could justify his actions. The only real question was what sentence he would receive and whether he would ever see the outside world again. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that this case was not just about Jeremiah Jones. It was about a pattern, one that had played out in courtrooms across the country. Similar cases had surfaced in recent years, instances where repeat offenders had been released on bond, only to commit horrific crimes. Women who had reported threats from former partners, only to be ignored by the system. Children caught in the crossfire of violence that should have been prevented. Legal experts debated what could be done to stop this from happening again. Stricter bond policies? Harsher penalties for those who violate release conditions? A more aggressive approach to handling domestic violence cases? These discussions were long overdue. But for Khylie and her surviving children, they came too late. The bigger picture was undeniable. Domestic violence threats were not being taken seriously enough. Too often, victims were left to fend for themselves, waiting until the worst happened before any real action was taken. The justice system, built on the idea of protecting the innocent, had instead enabled dangerous individuals to walk free. Jeremiah Jones being a prime example. As the courtroom proceedings continued, the weight of the tragedy remained. Khylie's family, her friends, and the Houston community watched closely, hoping that, this time, the system would get it right. But even with a guilty verdict, even with the harshest sentence, one truth remained unchanged. A child was gone, a mother was scarred, and no amount of legal punishment could undo what had been done. The trial would end. The media would move on. But for those who had lost Khylie, the consequences would last forever. Khylie Sorrells should have been safe that night. She should have woken up the next morning, excited for a new day, ready to play basketball and make TikTok videos with her friends. Instead, her life was stolen in an instant by someone who never should have been free. The justice system failed her. The question now is, will it finally hold someone accountable? Jeremiah Jones faces the full weight of the law, but the bigger issue remains. How many more families have to suffer before real change happens? How many more warnings need to be ignored? Should repeat violent offenders get multiple chances? Or should the system step in before innocent lives are lost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think needs to change to prevent tragedies like this? If you want to stay updated on cases like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Khylie's story deserves to be heard, and together, we can demand the justice she never got.